All right, guys, so we'll dive into Daniel 2 here. Like I said, we are going to split this up into two sections, but it does have a nice clean break that we can split it up with. So, starting off, Daniel 2, verse 1. This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, is the subtitle. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. The king commanded that the magicians and enchanters and sorcerers and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we shall show the interpretation. We will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be laid in ruins. But if you show me the dream and its interpretations, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered the king a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with the flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence, which we saw him do yesterday also, right? You notice how, again, he's replying with prudence. He's taking his time. He's making a request. And discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time, and he might show the interpretation to the king. So could you imagine that? Like, again, this is one of those things, like, imagine being Daniel. Imagine living in a place where the ruler literally waves his hand and you are ripped limb from limb. That's not figure of speech. That was something that Nebuchadnezzar and his reign, they would actually do to people as punishment. They would rip their arms and their legs off, and that's how they would kill you. Imagine that. Like, you get called in to come good on what you claim you can do, you balk a little bit, lose your arms and legs, and you're in turn your life because you're bleeding out at that point, right? They're not stopping it. They're not taking you to a hospital, right? I mean, this was the type of pressure. I mean, this was their life, was do this or die. No ifs, ands, or buts, no courts for trial, no juries to hear your case, no appellate court to hear your appeals if you don't get a favorable outcome, no representatives to exert your will. It's what the king says, and if you don't do it, you die. So that is like the context of this here. What's up, bud?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'm fairly decent with the writings in the Bible, but I completely overlooked how they were, like you said, the limbs and legs. I had no idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, this is the thing. So, this goes out, right? And here we have a bunch of people, a bunch of false prophets, magicians, sorcerers, people who practice divination, which is an abomination. It's an abominable practice to God, divination is. And they're having to make good on a bunch of lies, right? They're having to make good on that all of a sudden. They promised they could do something. That's how they got their office. These are not just, random guys on the street who are fortune telling, right? These are mostly men who have some sort of political office, some sort of civil office appointed by the king or the people underneath the king that he's appointed to find these types of people, right? And now we have to also remember that Babylon, at this point, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, had consumed plenty of other kingdoms. So these aren't just one sorcerer. These are multiple types of people who do multiple types of essentially witchcraft to try to get answers. Well, we know that there's only one person who can provide an answer to this type of stuff, and that's God. And they even acknowledge that. There's no man other than gods. And that's their gods with a little g. But their gods that they petitioned to for these answers couldn't make good on it. Right? Just like they couldn't in Isaiah's day. Right? So, and just like they can't now. They can't now. No one can see the future. What was it yesterday? John Kerry comes out and says, in 10 years, if we don't do something about it, we're not going to be able to reverse global warming. Didn't he say that 10 years ago? The same thing? Right? So, I'm not making a political statement on global warming as we sit here with the 12th snowstorm of the season. But what I'm saying is, no one can predict the future. But here's, again, we see this in current day. People, if we don't do this, well then this is definitely going to happen. This is coming 10 years down the road. And it doesn't. And that's exactly what you had in Nebuchadnezzar's day, right? You had people who claimed they could tell the future, claimed they had a connection, but really the only spiritual force they had behind them was Satan and demons, because we all know that that is the spiritual force behind the ancient Eastern gods, the false gods, right? And Satan does not know everything, unlike God. Satan's demons only know what he tells them, and that's not everything, unlike God. So when these sorcerers and magicians petitioned their false gods that were only empowered by demons and Satan, they could not tell the future. They don't know because they don't know all things. But God does. Daniel's God does. Our God does. And what does Daniel do? So these magicians, they're panicked. They're like, oh God, king, please, we're going to stall for some time. We can't figure out what you're asking us to do. No one can do that. Our gods can't provide this for you. They concede. They concede the powerlessness of their own gods, right? That'd be great if that happened today. The false gods of the state, the false gods of the different secular, humanistic gods of self, of knowledge with air quotes there. So it'd be great if they would finally admit, science. And I don't say science like I don't believe in science. I believe in science. I love science, and I think science is awesome because it proves more and more when we actually take a genuine, true look at science using the actual scientific method to find an answer, not to try to validate our own thoughts. When they actually use it the right way and follow the actual proper methods, it almost always reaffirms the existence of God. It reaffirms things we read in Scripture even. They found out a little bit ago using radio telescopes that the stars actually put out sounds. And there are people who put these sounds together and it makes wonderful music. The stars sing your glory and praises, Lord. Right? Modern science literally confirms what we hear in Scripture already. So, I'm digressing, staying on track. These magicians could not do it. And they got a sentence of death for being asked to fulfill a promise to come good on something that they wrote a check for. Payment was due. They wrote a check. They could not cash it. Because they did not surrender their lives, submit, obey, and follow God. And they were forced to finally admit that. Right? But we had Daniel. and his guys, right? And we saw yesterday that when they were asked to forsake their God and defile themselves, they petitioned with grace and being in a humble way to not be forced to do that. They said, hey, test us, test what we're saying. If it's no good, we'll do it your way. God blessed them. He showed that their way was right. And the captain of the guard, or the head eunuch, said, hey, do what they're asking. And because of that, 3 years later, they went before Nebuchadnezzar, and they were found to be pretty much the only ones worthy to stay in his royal court. And they were granted tons of privilege and tons of power, and they're going to be granted even more power here in a little bit, as we'll read. But this is all through God, his grace and his guidance, and our submission to him. So, we need to identify the false gods we have in our life, those magicians, those sorcerers, and we need to realize and admit that, hey, those have no power. The things that we think will save us, money, our intelligence. And I'm not knocking education. Everyone should get an education. Everyone should. It's very important, right? But there are people who put education as a god, or the education system as a god, or politicians as God, or celebrities and musical artists as gods. These people, these things are not going to save us. Only one thing will. That's Jesus. That's Jesus. Right? And when we put our trust in him, he will never let us down. He can't let us down because we're in his hand. And he'd have to drop us out of his hand to put us down. And that's not going to happen. We are in the care of an all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present God. And he will never let us down. And we're about to see that because Daniel was in the same care of that same God and trusted himself and his life. And we're going to see how he does this here. Pick it up in verse 17. God revealed Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel. So Daniel petitioned, hey, give me some time. I asked the king for a little bit of time. Let me petition my God, the all-knowing God, and he will reveal this to us. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, God-given names. Just pointing that one out again. And told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Follow false gods, put your trust in them, destruction and death follow. That's what's happening to all these wise men. In my opinion, God's passing judgment on them. You want to worship demons? You want to go to demons? You want to not come to me? That's fine. Here's your demise. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God, my Father, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. And Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, No wise man, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in later days. Your dream and visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. So here he says, there's no wise man, astrologer, so there's no studied person, there's no scientist.
Psychiatrist.
Enchanters, or magicians, sorcerers, or people who claim to have a special knowledge, secret hidden knowledge. All right, we have a revealed knowledge, not a secret hidden knowledge. Right? So he's saying none of these people can do for you what you seek. Only God can do this for you. And God has used me. It's nothing I've done. It's not my wisdom. It's God and what he has revealed to me that is going to provide for the king what you seek. God has used the situation, has used Daniel, has used the exile, has used all these things, has organized time and orchestrated time in a way to allow for God to be glorified. He's put all this in place for God to be glorified. When Daniel saw his family murdered, his city torn to the ground and burned, when he was led through a desert into a foreign land, do you think Daniel ever saw this coming? Do you think he ever thought, man, God's going to use me in the most awesome ways, and I'm going to go before the ruler of the world, and God's going to use me as the main instrument of his mouth to put to shame all these false God-believing, just wicked people, and God is going to be glorified to the King of the world through me? No. I don't think that he would ever have thought that. I wouldn't have thought that. No matter how, I'll admit it, I'm humble. No matter how close to God I was, if I saw that happen, right? But he never lost faith. So even when we're down, like I was saying yesterday, even when we're beat up, pushed into a corner, even when it seems hopeless, know that God is working all things for the good of those who love him. And we see that here. God was working all things for Daniel because he's going to use this to springboard Daniel to a very prominent and powerful position that's going to have repercussions for centuries to come. Where do you think the wise men came from when Jesus was born? They came from Babylon. They came from the east. What's east of Jerusalem? The former kingdom of Babylon. How did they know about Jesus? How did they know he was going to come? Because God exiled the Jews as a divine punishment, but in his grand orchestrated plan, he used that to spread the prediction of God's coming on earth, the advent of Jesus Christ, to the east, so that people could come from the furthest corners of the world, proclaiming the advent of God on earth, proclaiming the advent of the Messiah, bringing him rich gifts, and essentially foreshadowing that his glory would be known from corner to corner. Think Daniel saw that happening? No. We never know how God's using us. We never know what trials and tribulations are going to produce wonderful, beautiful things for God. But we need to trust. We need to have faith. God's using it. He's working in all those things. We may not see those things, because Daniel sure as heck didn't see some of those things. He didn't see the temple in Jerusalem rebuilt. But if it wasn't for Daniel, the things that happened after him would have never occurred. The temple would have never been rebuilt. Jerusalem would have never been repopulated. And think, if Jerusalem was never repopulated, think of the crucifixion story. What would have never happened? But God ordained all these things, and he's ordaining things now, and that's why it's so important to trust in him, even in the darkness. Know that his light is shining, he is working, he will deliver us. Some things we may never get to see, but know that his kingdom is growing, even through our trials and our tribulations, men. Amen. Who has prayer requests?